All right. Well, my name's Tom Chi, and over the years, I've worked on tons and tons of technology products. So you probably used some of them. I worked on Microsoft Outlook, helped create that. And I've worked on things ranging from mass market software like Microsoft Outlook to pioneering hardware like Google Glass and self-driving cars. Now, that experience actually, instead of making me more and more certain about what it was to go build something and how technology should be created, actually made me way more curious about the ways that people work together and the ways that amazing things can be created through um, like the processes and how we think and the ways that we cooperate. Now, all that said, along that journey, I saw that there was actually a lot more to the world than creating new technology products. My wife had enrolled in a program, and through that program, she taught me a lot about, you know, the problems in global sustainability that were facing us all. And I got inspired because of that to go out into the world and try to do something directly with that. Because I'm all about trying to figure out by doing first and then looking at the theory afterwards. So I've spent the last year and a half out in the world working with social entrepreneurs on issues like access to clean water or access to essential micronutrients or being able to get power to remote villages in rural Guatemala. And I brought the lessons that about how to work rapidly and how to invent and how to create new technologies to that world, and with no understanding of actually whether it would apply at all. So what happened? Well, the first surprise came relatively quickly. It was actually that it worked. You know, there's no reason that a process that was developed to make software development go 10 times faster should have anything to do with a startup being able to raise funds faster or being able to create jobs in a impoverished community. But it worked. And then the second surprise that came more gradually and was actually way more eye-opening to me was that it wasn't actually the techniques at all that were the reason that it worked. It, it was the mind shifts that were inspired by those techniques that allowed people to go see the problems in their life in new ways. And because of that, I went on to this kind of crazy journaling thing. I filled 3 journals with extremely tiny writing. Some of it is behind you. And I considered this process to basically be the debugging of collective consciousness. Like, what are the assumptions that we have in our minds that prevent us from solving the problems in our lives that we never even look at? And today I've distilled down some of those lessons, and I'd like to share the first couple lessons from that process with you. So 3 mind shifts to share that will make impossible problems possible again for you. The first is that knowing is the enemy of learning. Now, everybody thinks knowledge is great. And actually, knowledge is a noun, and knowledge is great. But knowing is a verb that you apply to your knowledge. It's a way that you use your knowledge. And just like any 2 verbs, it's very difficult to do 2 verbs at once. It's difficult to ride a bike and juggle at the same time. It's difficult to play the piano and read a book at the same time. And it's extremely, extremely difficult to be in a state of learning and a state of knowing at the same time. Actually, it is the worst, because knowing makes learning impossible. What happens in the mind when you're knowing something? Well, actually, you've got this current sphere of knowledge, and that, you are exuding what you know about that current sphere of knowledge. Like, knowing something makes it so that you just draw upon existing experiences. You're not open to new data. You don't consider new possibilities in the process of sharing your knowing. And learning is the opposite process. Learning is the process that seeks new ideas, that seeks new possibilities and plays with them in this kind of dynamic way that allows new things to form. There is a time and place for knowing. But the time and place for knowing are in situations where you have problems that have already been solved really well. Then you can just kind of solve them in that way again. But a lot of the global problems that we face today, not only have they not been solved well, they've never been solved, period. And we do the exact opposite with these problems. We trot out a bunch of experts. And if there's one thing about experts that they're really good at doing, is being in a constant state of knowing. And that has actually paralyzed our society. Like, our first instinct about big problems is to do the exact opposite things to our minds that is required to be able to find real solutions. Now, this is true about creating new technology products. It's true about, unlocking potential in the developing world. But it's also true really about any problem that you have in your life. And up here, I've put an exercise. We don't really have time to do it together, but around the world, I've been doing these exercises and sort of honing them. And this is a really simple one to go try when you get home. Just pick anything that's a stubborn challenge in your life, and within a minute, jot down some things you know for sure about them. And then challenge yourself just for 1 minute to pick any of those things and say, what else might I learn about it? And if you do that, and in a very short amount of time, the things that are intractable problems in your life will start to loosen. New possibilities will arrive, and you'll find your creative engine starting again, your learning engine starting again. And the enemy of knowing will disappear and learning will begin again. Now with that, we'll move on to a second mind shift. So what is this? It's fork, right? And actually something happened in all of your minds right here. In about 1/10 of a second, you saw this picture, you said fork, and then as soon as that was done, you stopped thinking about it. And this is actually exactly what we do thousands of times every day. We put a noun onto a thing, like a fork, and as soon as we're done assigning the noun to it, we're done thinking about it. Well, the second mind shift is to see verbs, not nouns. So we're going to go into a little exploration of a fork and see it through its verbs instead of its noun. And we're going to do it through just a single phrase. We're going to discover all the verbs inside of the fork by asking the question, how is it nuanced? All right, so we got a fork. Well, what is this fork made of? How is it nuanced? It looks like it's stainless steel. And that's kind of interesting because stainless steel is made of iron, it's made of chromium, it's made of a couple other things. But an interesting thing about iron and chromium is that it can only be created in a supernova. And actually, the iron and chromium that's in this fork has gone through at least 2 or 3 generations of supernova to be able to be in my hand today. Another thing about this fork, how else is it nuanced? Well, it's got a particular shape. There's no other utensil that's shaped like this. Well, where the heck did that come from? Well, it turns out that around 800 AD, the ancient Persians kind of made the very first fork. Now, it wasn't very popular at the time, but after some time, it became a little bit popular amongst the nobles in the Byzantine Empire. And once the Byzantine Empire fell, a lot of those nobles and intellectuals fled and participated in the Italian Renaissance. And several hundred years after the Italian Renaissance, the French picked it up, and in their pursuit of creating what we now know today as table manners, they basically created the shape of the fork that we're used to today. They also diversified the fork into the salad fork, the cake fork, and the dinner fork. Yeah, so if you're confused, that's what happened. That's why that happened. Now, look what happened in just the last couple minutes. You took something as simple as a noun that you would just look at and dismiss in seconds. And in just a minute or two, by looking at the verbs that were behind it, we've traveled over billions of years to go look at how a series of supernovas made this fork possible. We've traveled over half a dozen civilizations that were involved in allowing the fork to get the shape that it currently has. And while this is very, all well and good and interesting as it pertains to forks, as it pertains to inanimate objects, the real danger that happens is we do this with people too. And we'll look at a person and we'll say, Republican, Muslim, senior vice president, anything. And in 1/10 of a second, we're done thinking about them. We're done engaging with them. And that process makes it so that our capacity for compassion is lessened. We might be missing out on amazing friendships and relationships. And at the end of the day, I actually feel that this thing that we do in our mind in 1/10 of a second is the root of where racism, sexism, and jingoism, all the isms that plague us, originate. Now, how hard was it to debug this? It took longer than 1/10 of a second, because that's a very fast brain pathway that's happening. But it didn't take more than a couple minutes. Just asking that question a couple times to say, how is it nuanced? And there's a thing that goes around, everybody says, well, everything is connected, we're all connected. But they talk about it in a kind of like new age, airy-fairy type way. Or they use things like the butterfly effect, so it's kind of like scientific airy-fairy. No, actually everything is connected in a direct, tangible way that you can see in a couple minutes if you were to pay attention. This is connected to all the stars that exploded that make us up too. This is connected to the civilizations that formed, that allowed us to be where we are today. And it's connected to the global supply chain, which fills every single thing that we experience in our lives day to day. And if it's true about these inanimate objects and we lose so much potential of sight in that, think about how much we're missing by not being able to relate to each other beyond the labels that we put on each other. Now, the third mind shift I call using reality as your medium. And this is an oil painting that my wife did. And watching her work, it's very powerful, right? When a painter is doing an oil painting, they're living in that medium. A brush stroke comes on and it's the wrong color, and you can scrape it off with a palette knife and change the color. The stroke isn't exactly right, and you can use the next set of strokes in order to go modify it. And in the spaces where people are able to work in the medium, these are the spaces that we actually, I think it's no coincidence that these are the spaces where we see masterpieces arise. It might be painting, it might be music, it might be sculpture. When people are able to really connect inside of their medium, we see masterpieces. But actually, how do we choose to work today? Something like this. This is like a normal software process. And we don't get in the medium at all. We have an interesting idea, and instead of being in the medium of how the software might affect people's lives, we create slide decks. And then we have meetings, and those meetings circle around forever. And then maybe if they escape that, they'll graduate to specifications, which are still not how the software impacts people's lives. No, instead, if we're able to go look at the problems that we are working on today and get out of our cubicles or get out of our study desks and say, well, the place where this problem is actually going to be resolved out in the world is there. And I'm going to go there and work in the medium. Then so many things, like your ability to understand the world becomes so much richer. Your ability to go find solutions becomes dramatically expanded. And this relates to kind of a thought process which might help you guys get this done. A lot of times we think before we do. I think we got to do before we think. That's number one. But it's because we have this illusion that we've got to reason with the mind. We've got to figure it all out before we actually go out there and do things. But I would actually challenge that. Like, what's way more important than knowing why something, how something is going to work, is knowing that it works. There's a joke, where one economist says to the other, well, the main problem for Wikipedia for me is that it doesn't work in theory. And actually, I think a lot of people that work on Wikipedia don't even know why it works in practice. And it's true really about the most complex system. A bird, a flower, a fox doesn't actually really know how the whole ecosystem works, but there's still critical components to making that whole thing work. And especially as we enter a more global world with far more complex problems, we need to trust in the fact that it doesn't actually matter that we know how the thing was solved. It's way more important to get out there, work in the medium, and know that what you are doing by seeing it, just like a painter sees the brushstroke change the painting, see that it does work. And with that, I'd like to wrap up. 3 mind shifts for you guys to take a look at and apply in your own lives. Knowing is the enemy of learning. See the verbs behind something instead of the nouns. And then use reality as your medium. And hopefully you guys will be able to take some of these lessons and bring them back to your own lives to solve your own impossible problems. Thank you.